Hey everyone, I am Perry Halkitis. I am the Dean of the School of Public Health here at Rutgers University, and I'm a cisgender gay man. I'm joined today by three of my current and former mentees. In fact, they're probably all still my mentees, who are part of the School of Public Health here at Rutgers to talk about the role of sexual and gender minority individuals in leadership in academia. I'm joined today by Caleb Loschiavo, and these folks will introduce themselves in a moment, Kristen Krause and Rafael Perez Figueroa.
Hi, my name is Caleb Loschiavo. I am a fourth-year PhD candidate here at Rutgers School of Public Health. I am a gay trans man, and I have been working with Perry since my MPH, which I started in 2016, and Perry is now my dissertation committee chair.
Hey, my name is Kristen Krause. I'm an instructor of urban health here at the School of Public Health, and I'm also the deputy director at the Center for Health, Identity, Behavior, and Prevention Studies. I started working with Perry about 8 years ago when I started as an intern at CHIPS over at NYU, and I have been with him ever since. He was my doctoral advisor, and now he is my mentor and friend.
Hi, I'm Rafael Perez Figueroa. I'm an Associate Dean of Community Engagement and Public Health Practice at the School of Public Health. I'm also an Associate Professor of Urban Global Health. And I met Perry while I was an MPH student many years ago. And I had the opportunity to work in other institutions, and now we are working together. I'm a gay man, and I use the pronouns he, him, and not less important, él.
I think one of the things that you may have already understood from the introductions of my three colleagues is that in my role as a mentor and in my role as a dean and my role as a cisgender gay man, I often identify individuals who I begin to work with and then create a trajectory for them to continue to work with me and help them grow in their own aspirations. And I think that sort of identification of people who have potential, who are also sexual and gender minority, is a really important part of leadership. I'm going to ask each of the individuals who are with me here today a brief set of questions about being a leader and being sexual and or gender minority. And the first one I'm going to ask is this: why is it important for us to have individuals who are out and open about their sexuality and about their gender identity to be in leadership roles in academia?
So I think like that that is a critical question. What I think about that is like when I was a student of public health, I was clear that I wanted to study sexual and gender minorities and their health issues, but until I met Perry, I have never had the opportunity to have a professor that was like me. And when I say was like me, was also a gay man, but act like a gay man. So I think that the value that have is that, like he was somebody that was comfortable in his skin. He was concerned about like the health of sexual and gender minorities, but he understand that like through his own perspective and experience, he was part like of the community, and that reflected his commitment. And in the other hand, for me, that was like a form of role model. Like it opens my mind about the idea that I can integrate who I am in the kind of work that I do, in what does that represents for people like us and their health issues. And I seen that understanding and being committed to health issues at that level is critical for advancing the health problems of those communities.
I think very similar to that. And something that Perry exemplifies really well is the importance of bringing one's full self as a sexual or gender minority person to their leadership. And I think so often as LGBTQ people doing work on LGBTQ communities, we're made to feel like we have to hide that part of ourselves or suppress that part of ourselves in order to come across as objective in our work. and is not biased because of our own experiences with or concerns about the community. And to have a mentor who is fully in his everyday life an out, proud gay man makes space for me to do that. And through learning how to do that, I know that then I can be that kind of mentor in the future for other students.
Yeah, I think to that point, I mean, we're so clear that representation matters, right? Where, you know, even now as like an out gay lesbian woman to my students, you know, having queer students myself like see themselves represented in me, and I saw myself represented in Perry, and with all of us that we have the opportunity to work with, you know, really does show that LGBT people can be in these roles, and we can have these conversations, and we can, you know, be not just in LGBT spaces, but in spaces at large as well that make the world a healthier place for everyone. And while we may have a specific attention to LGBT health in that skill set, we are still guided by, you know, our broader principles to make sure that, you know, we're creating the world that we want to live in as ourselves. So
And I would like to add to that, because I think like that it goes beyond just being represented. It goes beyond just having people who have specific identities in position of power and being leader. It's like integrating that experience, using that like for relating to communities, for thinking about like the change that we want to see in society, right? And owning that, right? And I think that goes beyond just having a specific identity. There's a lot of people that have like my same identity, and I don't feel that I relate, right? But to the extent that we can utilize that identity, be mindful about that, and integrate that like in our work, I think that that's a powerful thing. And I think that is revolutionary and is different about Dr. Halkitis, because, you know, like I remember very vividly my training, how like I have mentors before that told me, Rafa, make sure that you do work that is distant from your experience. And I'm 100% happy that I never followed that advice. And what I want like to do is do work that is close to my experience, that I can bring who I am, my understanding of who I am, and how do I relate to those problems, to the kind of change that I want like to propose. But also to make sure that like I bring others to the table that have perhaps different perspectives, right? Others that are like me, but like that have a different experience of that I have. And I think that is powerful, and that is something that I have seen Dr. Halkitis do.
So you've heard some thoughts from my colleagues about being members of the SGM population and also working with me. I want to say that I think it's critically important, and I think all three touched upon this idea that our identities as LGBTQ people are not cast aside when we're in academic roles. We don't conveniently leave them at home or in a box or something. And when I first came here to Rutgers, somebody said to me something that was very wise, which is, you know, there have probably been other gay men who've been deans of schools, right? But they didn't lead with their gay identity. And that's hugely, hugely different when one brings one's authentic self into one's work and doesn't cast it aside. And for me, it's a lot about normalization, either, you know, when I'm, you know, working with my mentees or in my classroom where I give examples of LGBTQ health all the time. And I can see little smirks occasionally from students who are not used to hearing about sexual behavior of gay men or meth use or any of the other areas that I study. But what it does is it puts it in the context of a regular course, in this case, as Caleb knows, because we're teaching this together, biostatistics this semester. I also want to share a story that when I first came to Rutgers, there was a student who was on an MPH program, an African American female identified lesbian, who came to my office one day after school to say that my presence had really shown her that the possibilities were endless for her, and that she didn't think that before, but because she saw me, and because she saw me in this role, she thought like, well, what are the limitations for her? There are no limitations. If I can do it, she can do it, and that made me extremely happy. I will say that in my previous institution, I did experience a glass ceiling, I think, because of being a gay man. It was actually an institution that was supposedly very progressive, but I actually think Rutgers has been a much better institution at helping me be my full self, and actually celebrating my full self as a gay man. So I want to ask my colleagues another question, and hear their wise words. I want to maybe hear about their own experience. If you could tell me a little bit about your own experiences in mentoring students or other colleagues who are SGM, if you could address that, and how that has felt for you and why it matters to you. And then I want to sort of conclude with, and we'll come back to this question later, um, what are the challenges we continue to face in ensuring that sexual and gender minority people, who, by the way, are not monolithic, let's be extremely clear, who hold these intersectional identities. These three individuals here with me are part of the SGM population, but we are also radically different in many other ways, right? And so celebrating our diversity also within this SGM population is really critical. Because I think too often we tend to think that LGBT people live in one box. And we clearly, the four of us, don't live in the same box. We live in different boxes and sometimes overlapping boxes. So let me hear from our colleagues here, my colleagues here, about their experiences in mentoring members of the queer population. I don't like the word community, I like population better because we are a population, and what that's felt like for them.
I think for me, in my own mentorship, providing mentorship over the last couple of years, it's been a lot of fun and eye-opening in different ways. I think having the opportunity to teach different groups of students who have taken my LGBT health course, who come in with different identities all across the spectrum, has taught me a lot. I mean, I know that I've really advanced a lot of my skills and my language and how I approach and think about things over the last couple of years, especially. But it also just, it feels good to be able to be that person for someone to understand that lived experience in ways that I know Perry was to me, to now be that for students here at Rutgers and for students who haven't, like Perry said before, who haven't seen that representation in the same way and who haven't been able to have those interactions. And so, I tell my students every time I start teaching that for me it's a privilege to be able to be in that space with them, because not everyone gets that opportunity, and to be able to lead conversations in a thoughtful and meaningful way, I think is one of the most critical parts of my mentorship.
I think that I totally agree that like is a privilege, right? I think that like in my experience is also a responsibility. I take that like with a big sense of responsibility. I think that I have had great mentors, and I have had the experience about like like how that have opened door for me in my career. And when I think about like those great mentors, in particular Dr. Halkitis, I think about like something that I admire about working with him is that he let me do. He knows how to bring people to the table that have a variety of skills, a variety of perspective, uh, but he celebrate your uniqueness within that and cultivate you in a way that you can do your work and do your best work. And that is something that I try to model with the people that I mentor. I make sure that I bring people to the table that have different experiences. And I make sure that they have a space to bring that experience to the work that they do. And then, like, my job is to make sure that I give them the resources to succeed, that I support them in the process of succeeding. I think that also something that like makes me think is when you talk about like how we have all these identities, right? So in my case, I'm not only a gay man, I'm also a Latino, somebody with an accent, somebody who is an immigrant, right? There's other people in other culture that have different identities that they consider themselves expatriates. But because of the place where I come, I'm an immigrant in the context of this particular country. I'm also a person of color. I'm African Caribbean, right? So I still have the experience of being in the room and being in the table in spaces in which I'm the only one. I represent this perspective. And still to this moment, like when I talk about that experience, there's an emotional connection to me. And I have like to, I'm always have to think and make calculations about what kind of arguments do I make just because of who I am and what I represent in that table. And that is very problematic. And still that take a toll on me, although that takes a toll on me, I keep looking for ways of making that argument and making sure that other people that have different characteristics get to sit in the table. And I think that that's something that I have seen Perry doing, bringing people to the table. And to the extent that we commit to do that, to bring those different perspectives, to make sure that underrepresented groups get to participate, get to say what they have to say, and get to contribute to change. That is something powerful and that I want to achieve in my style of mentorship.
Like my colleagues, I also teach some of the classes here at our LGBTQ health program and some LGBTQ health courses at our former institution. And I've had so many students who I've taught and who I've mentored who have expressed how grateful they are to have a teacher or a mentor who is also, you know, a queer person or a trans person. And that makes me so happy, but also makes me a little sad because part of what they're so excited and grateful about is because it's so rare. And I think about how grateful I am for Perry and our relationship, but also how rare that is for me to have a mentor or professor who is also an out proud gay man. And I think that's one of the challenges too, and part of why I hold it as such an important responsibility in teaching and mentoring these students is so that they can one day be mentors and teachers for future queer and trans people in academia, and so that for the next generation they can make it a less rare experience to have out proud queer and trans mentors.
So, I think you've heard my colleagues talk about, owning one's identity. You've heard me talking about owning my identity. And I will say that for a very long time, as I was evolving in my career, I was a gay man who came of age in the 80s and the 90s. I lived in the shadows in some ways in my work. And when I came to Rutgers, I was very, very conscious of the fact that I had to be open and out and loud and proud about my identity as a member of the sexual and gender minority population. And I think in this moment of history, more than ever, it's critically important that leaders own their authentic selves and their work. I think the happenings in our country, particularly in Florida and in other states like Texas, that are attempting to mute the voice of LGBTQ people is an opportunity for all of us who are in leadership roles to be louder. It's not time to be quieter. It's time to be louder. So with that in mind, we're going to conclude our conversation today by having my colleagues reflect on what is one wisdom they would like to impart to you with regard to either being a leader in our population in academia, or some advice for working with students and mentees who are members of the sexual and gender minority population.
Being visible, I think that yes, I agree that this is a time in which we need like to make our voices being heard, and we need like to do that like with a sense of responsibility. we need like to put our ideas out there, right? Now, my advice for leaders and for students that like want to lead is that question everything. When I think about like the people that have been my mentor, right? I think like that the majority of those people and the people that have been my professors uh, are like white men with so much privilege, and they represent one perspective. When I think about academic institutions, I see the same, which makes me think that there's bias in the formation of knowledge, and that is part like of the existing reality. If that is the case, probably all the advice that I have received up to now, all the systems that I know about like how to do research and how to do things, are also biased with that perspective. So it is critical to question those systems that perpetuate those forms of knowledge. So what I invite all my students is like to be critical about those systems, to look for ways of doing things in different ways. I think that like when I think about health in this country and across the world, the main characteristics of health system is that they are uh, plagued by inequities, by striking inequities. And what made us think that continue doing the same once and again is gonna lead like to different results. We need like to do things in different ways. So that is like one of my advice and something that I think often about like how we can decolonize academia, how we can decolonize leadership. To me, leadership is about like, like outlining a vision, engaging others into participating in that vision. But what kind of visions do we want like to bring to the table? What kind of process do we want? In that process of engaging others and making sure that they participate and that they play a role in changing society and in changing our public health systems, what approaches do we use and how does that bring values to communities and populations that we care about? That is something that I spend a lot of time thinking and that I hope that my students engage into questioning as well.
I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that up.
Just take a different approach.
I don't know. How I'm
I can
supposed
go
to-
next if you want.
No, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about too is, yes, telling students to question everything, but also as someone who's now on faculty in this position is to make sure that, I never stop learning from my students. I'm always learning, where we are with language and terminology, especially within our community. I feel like it's rapidly evolving all of the time. And as we start having these conversations about, decolonization and what true inclusivity looks like, making sure that, my door isn't closed to having those opportunities. And if students are, engaging with me in certain conversations, that I'm listening and that I'm not being defensive or coming in as the know-it-all, because I think that is kind of what happens in academia sometimes, where we think we're here like, okay, we've got nothing more to learn, but I'm learning something new every single day. So that's one piece of advice. And I think the other is, when you're in this space, to own the lived experience that you likely do have, and understand that the questions that you might be developing from a research perspective or just from a whatever perspective are valid, and that a lot of times, as we like to say around here, research is me search in a lot of ways. And so kind of going against the grain of that potential bias and knowing that those lived experiences do mean something, and they're just as important to kind of hone in on and understand, because likely that's going to have a much more widespread impact on the community at large.
I think one of the things that you're hearing very clearly is that being a leader in the academy requires that you don't stay stuck, that you continue to evolve. I think that's one of the things I do well, actually. I actually think I'm trying to push myself constantly to think differently. And I'm I force myself to think differently by surrounding myself with folks like the ones you've heard from today, from Rafa and from Kristen and from Caleb, to push me and to question my biases that I have, and to question the biases that not only exist in society at large, but within this LGBTQ population, biases that cis men impose on women, and cis folks put on trans folks, and white folks put on people of color, and like thinking about those in a really, really, really nuanced way. If we don't do that, we continue to perpetuate, as Rafa said, the status quo. And especially in academic medicine, where I think many of the paradigms have been developed by heterosexual white men who, as Kristen refers to right now, often act as gatekeepers to prevent us from making change. We have a system that's in some ways really broken. We're not enough, I've said many times, enough with documenting health disparities. We know there's disparities, great. We need to fight every day towards health equity. COVID, like shown that up or shined that up, or raised that up, very clearly. HIV showed that. Obesity shows that. Cardiovascular disease shows that. We have to change the way we think about the delivery of care and the delivery of public health to diverse populations and the multiple intersectional identities that they hold. And I think that this notion that health is just about biological has perpetuated for way too long. And what we're talking about here, as we're talking about our sexual identities and our gender identities also, is that how do we infuse those issues? How do we infuse issues of identity with, biological and psychological processes, recognizing that defines the whole person? And I'm, really proud to say that, when I first came here, we talked about creating a concentration in LGBT public health. We decided, we were going to do a certificate at first, but we decided to do a whole concentration, and now we're like the first school in the world to have this concentration, and I'm really proud of it. And some people might look at it, and people have said to me in the past, that's very niche. Your research is very niche, Halkitis. And my response to that is, no, it's just really, really relevant. So to you, all of you who want to be leaders, you have to really push back and question everything from the way promotion and tenure guidelines are being developed and are being implemented, to what I perceive as a very broken NIH review system. And the way that grants are being reviewed by a very narrow set of individuals who are trained by a very narrow set of individuals who don't really have the ability to really score things that are innovative and interesting. And so that's our challenge, not only as academic leaders, but as academic leaders who are LGBTQ. Rafa, you wanted to say something about that, right?
Yes. Another piece of advice that I have for people and students, especially that want to lead in and who are minorities in general, is that it takes a toll on you. And what I mean by that is making the point, changing the system, being in the table. Sometimes it feels alienating. It feels sad. It feels like you are in a room in which everybody's against you, and on an everyday basis, that takes a toll, right? And there's days in which I feel very bad about doing that, but I recognize that uh, there's a role that I have to play, and that there's something bigger than me. I feel that in my own experience, I have been bullied, marginalized, undermined in so many ways. But looking for ways of continue doing the work that you do, that you believe in, that saying what you need to say, even if that takes you a long time to do. I think that is very important. And also people need to remember that there's people that have done this work behind you, before you, right? There's other people with whom you can rely and build community and learn from, and having an understanding and having a memory about who those people are is very important, because we are not alone. So I hope that students that want to lead and that want to change system and to take this responsibility, remember that when you have a bad day, you are not alone. And if you need somebody, look for me, look for Perry, look for any of us in the room, because we are here for you.
Shift here really quickly. And I have one thing to say to wrap us up here. Thank you for that, Rafa, because that inspired me to say one more thing, which is the following. I think it's critically important for somebody like myself, who has a lot of power and a lot of privilege, because I am a person who is more advanced in his career and his age, and also is in a comfortable position with my role here as a dean, but is also a white man, right? A white man of certain means, to use that power and privilege to fight against the injustices that we continue to see in our society, whether they be against LGBTQ people or people of color or the intersection of people of color and LGBTQ people. And so all of you who are of my generation, who have the power and the privilege, use it to do good, and importantly, use it so that you don't just create copies of yourself outside in the world. I want Caleb and Kristen and Rafa to be better versions of me, their unique selves. And a good mentor, a good leader, wants people to excel, and doesn't want them just to be copies of what that person has done. So take those thoughts with you, and we will talk some more.